Imagine arriving in the heart of Canada's West in the late 1800s. No cities, no roads, just endless waves of grass and sky. You're a homesteader, staking your claim on 160 acres of free land under the Dominion Lands Act. But there's one big problem. No trees for lumber. So how do you build a home? Enter the sod house, or Soddie, the humble, earthy dwelling that sheltered thousands of Canadian pioneers. Today, I'm diving into the world of sod houses. This is the story of ingenuity, hardship, and the spirit that built the West. Sod houses were simple structures built primarily from blocks of sod. That's the dense mat of grass roots and soil that covers the prairie ground. In Canada, these Soddies became iconic symbols of early settlement on the prairies, where European immigrants and settlers from eastern Canada flocked to after Confederation in 1867. Now picture a rectangle house, often about 4 meters by 5 meters for a family, with walls made of stacked sod bricks. Each brick was typically cut to around 3 feet long, 30 to 60 centimeters wide, and about 15 centimeters thick, weighing up to 22 kilograms. The grass side faced down to help the roots bind the structure together, creating a living wall that could even spout flowers in the spring. These weren't fancy, they were basic shelters, sometimes dug partially into the ground for added stability. In Canadian history, sod houses were especially common among Ukrainians, Scandinavians, Doukhobors, and British immigrants who arrived in waves from the 1890s to the early 1900s, drawn by the promise of fertile land. Sites like the Addison Sod House in Saskatchewan, which is now a National Historic Site, give us a glimpse into the era. It's one of the few surviving examples preserved to show how these homes dotted the landscape. Interestingly, Indigenous peoples in the region, like in British Columbia, had used sod for shelters long before European arrival, but the settlers' Soddies became a hallmark of prairie homesteading. Why turn to dirt and grass for a home? Well, it boiled down to necessity and the harsh realities of prairie life. After the Canadian Pacific Railway opened the West in the 1880s, the government aggressively promoted immigration through the Dominions Act of 1872, offering homesteads to anyone willing to farm the land for 3 years. But in the prairies, there were vast treeless expanses in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. These lacked wood for traditional log cabins. But sod was free and readily available, making it the perfect stopgap material. For many settlers arriving between 1867 and 1914, building a sod house was a quick way to meet homesteading requirements and survive those first brutal winters. Groups like Ukrainian peasants fleeing poverty in Europe or Mennonites seeking religious freedom often had little money or resources upon their arrival. Estimates suggest that around 1 million sod houses were in use across the North American prairies between 1900 and 1910, with a huge portion in the Canadian West. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical. Sod houses allowed families to focus on breaking the land and planting crops rather than hunting for scarce building supplies. Building a sod house was a community effort, often done in a day or two with the help from neighbors. First settlers used a special sod-cutting plow, pulled by oxen or horses, to slice through the thick prairie grass roots, creating long strips of sod. These were then chopped into bricks with an axe or spade. The foundation? Well, sometimes just a shallow trench, or the house was partially dug into a hillside for wind protection that was often used by the Doukhobors. Walls went up by stacking the bricks like oversized Legos, grass side down, in alternating layers for strength. Mud or clay plastered the gaps to seal out the elements. For the roof, settlers scavenged whatever they could, wooden poles from riverbanks, covered with tar paper if it was available, then layered with more sod. Now the windows, those were small, and they were covered with oiled paper or animal hides at first, and doors were simple wooden frames. No fancy tools required, just sweat, determination, and the land itself. Now, what were the advantages? Despite their humble appearance, sod houses had some real perks that made them pretty much lifesavers on the Canadian prairies. Top of the list was insulation. Those thick sod walls, which were up to 60 centimeters wide, kept homes warm in minus 40-degree winters and cool during scorching summers, and better than some modern homes without central heating and central air conditioning. They were also incredibly cheap. They were essentially free if you ignored the labor, and they were fire resistant, a huge plus in dry grasslands prone to wildfires. In windy provinces, like in southern Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, Soddies hunkered low to the ground. They resisted blizzards and dust storms that could topple flimsier structures. Now, for cash-strapped homesteaders, this meant more resources for seeds, tools, and livestock, helping turn the prairies into Canada's breadbasket. But life in a Soddie wasn't always rosy. Far from it. The biggest issue? They leaked during heavy rains, turning floors into mud pits and causing walls to slump or collapse if not maintained. Insects or rodents loved burrowing in, so think of mice and snakes and beetles dropping from the ceiling mid-meal. And darkness was an issue. These small windows meant dim interiors, and dirt constantly sifted down, making housekeeping a complete nightmare. Health concerns arose too. Damp conditions could lead to mold, respiratory issues, or even typhoid from contaminated water seeping in. And socially, in a class-conscious Canadian society, sod houses screamed poverty, leading to a stigma for immigrant families. And in harsh prairie winters, isolation in these remote dwellings amplified the feelings of loneliness and hardship. Now, most Canadian Soddies lasted about 10 to 20 years, though some, like the Addison sod house built in 1909, endured longer with regular whitewashing and repairs. They would slowly deteriorate from weathering and erosion and neglect as families upgraded. And by the 1920s, as railroads expanded and lumber became affordable, settlers replaced Soddies with frame houses, some of which you could just order from the Eaton's catalog. The Great Depression also delayed this for some, but post-World War II, prosperity sealed their fate. And why aren't they used anymore? Well, modern materials like brick, wood, and insulation offer better durability, hygiene, and comfort without the maintenance hassles. Now, sod houses may be relics now, but they embody the grit that shaped Canada's prairies. From immigrant dreams to agricultural empires, they were the foundation, literally. And if you're in Saskatchewan, why don't you visit the Addison sod house for a real taste of history? Now, thanks for watching, learning about Soddies. Like, subscribe, and you know what? Share your own family's prairie stories below.